Oh, great. We've got folks from Maine, from Washington, Brattleboro. This is awesome. Welcome, welcome. Excellent. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. But again, if you are just joining us, um, you can introduce yourself in the chat box, including your first and last name, pronouns, where you're from, and what native land that you are on. And that can be where you work or where you live or where you physically are right now. And you can find this information out by texting your zip code or your city and state separated by a comma by the number listed here on the screen. Huntsville, Alabama, welcome. Wow. It's always so great to see the reach that our webinars get. And it's really helpful when NAAE retweets us or shares it. But we are so glad that you all are here. Another couple minutes. All right. Well, it is 4:02 and we have an action-packed webinar. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But thank you all so much for coming. We've got someone from Wisconsin here. Incredible. So excited to have all of you here for place-based education and place-based teaching on a budget. We are the Vermont Education and Environment Network. And what we do is we are a state affiliate of North American Association of Environmental Education, or NAAE. Vermont Education and Environment Network is also formerly known as Vermont SWEEP. And over the last year, our board of directors has been working to identify ways that we can best serve our community of educators and environmental professionals, and really reimagining our mission and rebranding. And on the front and center of our webpage, you can find both our mission and our commitment to change. And our mission is to foster a network of individuals and organizations working together to promote high quality outdoor environmental and educational experiences. And we think we can do that by connecting outdoor educators and classroom teachers and everyone there in between. And we know that there are barriers to equity and justice and inclusion in this work. And our network isn't where we want to be yet. And we are working on learning and addressing and improving the way that we move through the world, just as individuals and as an organization, by engaging in active listening and learning. And you can find all of that on our website. And Allie, my co-host, is going to put the link in the chat to our website. So we got to our webinar series through learning more about the needs of our community. So as we were rebranding and reimagining the work that we wanted to do as a network and organization, we put out a survey to educators around the state, both classroom and environmental and educational community partners, to find out how their teaching practices have shifted and what support they might need. And as you might expect, virtual teaching and learning is dominating the field, both for formal and informal educators. And what we learned is that really the top need for K-12 classroom teachers is needing outdoor content. So as COVID is an ongoing pandemic, people are more interested in getting their students outside. But teachers have said, I need help with that, please. And informal teachers and educators have indicated that they have a need for online teaching strategies. So those folks who are so committed typically to helping students ID plants and things are really needing support in virtual space education. So that is where we come in our webinar series of place-based teaching and education on a budget. All right, so for some Zoom etiquette, I'll remind you that we do have a chat box. It's a great way to show your excitement and interest, but do be aware that each time you put something in there, it does show up for the panelists. So once they're presenting, it can be a little bit distracting to have the chat going pretty frequently. So just be mindful of that. We do have a Q&A box, and you can put your questions about the presentation materials in the Q&A box. And if someone else has the same question, you can give that a thumbs up, and that question gets elevated and highlighted for us moderators here behind the scenes. So utilize that feature. All right, so our panelists today are all folks from who are working in Vermont. Maureen Rowe is a 4th to 6th grade math and science teacher at Stockbridge Central School in Stockbridge, Vermont. Vanessa Stern is a 4th grade teacher, not just a science teacher, but a general 4th grade teacher at Union Street School in Springfield, Vermont. And we have Rebecca Roy, Parks Interpretive Program Manager at Vermont Department of Forest, Parks and Rec. And what's so special about the three of these people is that we were just talking before you all got here, is that schools and the government are both sort of on a notoriously limited budget for education. And so these three folks really know a lot about doing high quality education on a low budget or no budget. So without further ado, I am going to have the panelists come off of mute and introduce themselves. So Maureen, why don't you introduce yourself, your organization, and provide a brief overview of your experience using place-based education on a budget.
Okay, so my name, like she said, is Maureen Rowe, and I teach at Stockbridge Central School. This is my 3rd year classroom teaching. Prior to that, I did outdoor ed for about 5 years, and I did farm to school. So I'm kind of both sides of the coin. And an overview of my experience with place-based education on budget, I think, is just the connections I've made when I've been working through, whether it's like Rebecca, I know through Vermont State Parks, and then someone else I know through Fish and Wildlife, and there's all these connections that once you make those connections, then you have an endless amount of opportunities, especially low cost or no cost, like from snorkeling into the White River to picking up, to pulling invasives, to going to the farm. There's all these opportunities that we live in Vermont and other people around the country. I didn't know that to be a national. But you have those same opportunities where you live as well.
Great, thanks, Maureen. Vanessa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yep, Vanessa Stern, 4th grade teacher. I use she, her as pronouns. And I'm in Vermont, Abnaki land. And I'm so glad that you asked which land we were on, because it's a good segue. I've been doing placements education for about 14 years, and I started as a kindergarten teacher, and David Sobel was a very big inspiration for me. So a lot of you have probably read his books, and it's listed as a resource in my slides you'll be receiving later. But just like Maureen said, I've learned over the years that the more connections you make, the more connections you make. And I think since we do operate in a low budget, I think finding those resources are key and finding help is key. So I do a lot of looking around for resources, asking people, phone calling. And honestly, it's become easier over time because I've gotten to know so many people who will, and if you ask, people will help, honestly, and that's what I have found. So I ask a lot. I ask a lot of people for help and support, and you'll see that later in my presentation. But I think that is key today, to be able to ask for help, and people do want to help, I think.
Oh, great, Vanessa. Thank you so much. And Rebecca, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Roy. I manage the Park Interpreter Program for Vermont State Parks, which is part of the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. And so I have 17 seasonal interpreters doing educational programming across the state. And you might think that we have deep pockets in the state of Vermont, but we do not. And so to just start off, I just want to say that the key to doing place-based education is to use whatever you have outside of your door, whether it be a tiny nature center or a tent or your school building, because the key ingredient is your enthusiasm in the exploration. And I'll talk about that more when I present in a little while.
All right, thank you, panelists. So each of these panelists today does have their own presentation that they're going to share with you some of the activities that they do and a little bit of behind the scenes. So you'll get to see that magic of how to do this on zero budget or a very limited budget. So we are going to get started with Vanessa. So Vanessa, take it away.
Great, thank you. And I realized I was saying a minute ago that the Abnaki land was a great segue, and I never finished that thought. So I'll finish it now. So basically, you'll see that I usually start by finding a local resource. I'm teaching school, so we have standards we have to address. I've never seen myself as someone who's very standards focused, but that's my job. So, but I found that you can look at these standards and find a wealth of ways to address them in the outdoors. So that's what I do. And I think it works pretty well across disciplines. So I usually also start with something that's happening in the world. So coming out of a lot of the social and racial justice work we've been seeing, this year, I'm in Springfield, Vermont, which is an old mill town, an old industrial town. Lots of factories along the Black River that are now defunct. So we're really looking at the Abnaki peoples this year and looking at how land has changed through development and industry, and also equity issues because of that, and power issues. I know it's fourth grade, but I think that when handled sensitively and in a concrete way, kids are capable of really understanding large concepts. So that was my Abnaki connection. But every year looks different, except for certain things that you'll see later, like sit spots and journaling and leaf pack projects. Some things I do are consistent, but the big picture is different every year depending on what's happening in the world. I always over the summer, I think about what's a big question, what's happening, and then I try to take all of my content and sort of fit it into that in an interdisciplinary way. So, and again, this year it's the Abnaki studies basically, and looking at development and how that's made people adapt for good and for bad, and what our responsibilities are in that. So as we're looking at the Abnaki land in Springfield, we go into the woods a lot and imagine what it was like before the factories got here. We go down, we walk around town and look at the factories. We look at how it's changed the sides of the rivers. So it's very concrete work, and kids have a chance to reflect on that and, work towards a bigger project based on that. So this year, as we're looking at the Abnaki, what's changed in the environment, the big piece at the end, I don't know if anyone here has heard of the Green Amendment, which is actually a bill that Senator Bray is trying to pass. I see the alleys nodding, is trying to get passed in Vermont. So my students will have a chance. I'm hoping that the work, looking at the changes in Springfield, they'll see the impact on the environment most clearly in the Black River. They do a lot of work with water, and they see water quality. They can, the Leaf Pack project is part of assessing water quality. So they'll start looking at how the factories really polluted Springfield. There's been more cleanup now. And then my students are going to write a letter to the legislature about the Green Amendment and sort of urging them to support it, if that's the opinion they come to. We'll see in the spring, and we'll see where this leading lens actually. So when I'm looking at the standards, As a teacher, I look at my local resources and I think about the environment and how can I teach reading, math, and writing with a focus on the environment, because I want my students in the end to become land stewards so they can help preserve the environment. And as much as, like, as David Sobel says in a lot of his books, if children don't learn to love the land, they won't care about it and there won't be anyone to protect it. And I'm concerned as a teacher and an older person now who didn't grow up with technology, that kids are getting more and more far removed from the land and hands-on concrete tactile experiences of the land, that I wanted even more in my classroom. So next slide, thank you. So this was a third grade project that came out of when we were really talking about the decline of bees in the world. And students were learning that bees were, like honeybees, pollinated 80% of our food. So over the course of a year, we worked towards garden design. These were all, many of these resources are free. I had a parent who was a beekeeper. He came in. We used our school trip money to go to the Butterfly Museum, which is in Massachusetts. So kids got to hold butterflies, feel them. They would land them. Then they did journaling there. We did a math activity. This is a round garden. We became a human compass, and with a big string, we marked out a 40-foot diameter circle for this garden, so a math activity. They then translated this to graph paper in the classroom to scale. So I think it was like 40 centimeters. And the walkways, the garden has like this crossed walkway. It's like 4 feet wide. They did that to scale. They started researching what color plants butterflies were attracted to. They looked at books, and then they did a grid color blocks in the garden. So they had kind of some sense of design. Of course, the garden didn't come out with the exact colors in the same places. So basically the big idea was pollinator garden because of the bees, and it carried us through a lot of the disciplines for the year. And that was a big third grade project. So next slide. So this is on the Black River. A man named Mr. Grout founded this park when he was in his 70s. He had just died that year. My students had met him before because he used to meet us at the park occasionally and read poetry. So we took a year restoring the park. He had made informational signs for people to learn about Springfield. They had all fallen down over the years. So we decided to make signs. So for a year, the students researched Harold Grout's life. They wrote a book and was printed in hardcover through this company. And then they made all new informational signs about the animals along the Black River, the water quality, the factories, the owners of the factories. And there were 10 signs placed on Grout Park, plus a book about Harold placed in the library. And a couple of people, I think, bought his book too. And then we had a dedication. His daughters came to the dedication of the park. And so just again, a year-long project with a goal at the end, tying in all these different disciplines. I have to say that was one of my favorite projects. And a company in Springfield who makes acrylic, they donated all the acrylic coverings for the signs. I just called them and asked, and then they called me back and said, anything else we can do, let us know. So, and then we had 7th graders help us put the signs up. So a lot of teamwork. It was a good 4th grade project. So next slide. Oh, this is also a Grout Park. This is one of my favorite things, the leaf pack project, looking for macroinvertebrates. Kids love it. It gets them out in nature. It gets them to not be afraid of standing in the water. We get to do a biotic index, which is like certain animals have certain taxon values. So depending on what you see more or less of, it can tell you something about your water quality. So these kids that are 4th and 5th graders can do that and they rise to it. So I do that one every year. And next slide. I'm trying to be aware of the time too. This looks a little funky. So we're doing solar system in 5th grade. So Earth's place in the universe. And I think those of you who live around here have seen the solar system model to Montshire that's to scale. We decided we would do our own to scale. So this took, again, probably half a year. The students made planets. You'll see one, paper mache. They had to be to scale size-wise. They had to be to scale distance-wise. The math we did on a calculator, but we kind of showed them the formula with these numbers first. We ended up calling this house, the kids mapped out this house. That's where Jupiter had to be to fit. So we called the people who live there, and they're kind enough to let us hang Jupiter on their mailbox for months. And then we had Shaw's had Saturn, the co-op had Pluto. This flower, we had the last, well, actually, no, Pluto was at the flower shop, was 3 miles away from the school. Then we got on a bus and we drove it, and the kids that drove the bus driver crazy probably. Every time they went to a 1/10 of a mile, we had to shout out 1/10 of a mile, 2/10 of a mile. We had to count all the miles to get a sense. So that was incredibly fun, honestly, and trying to give them a sense of scale. So really using outside and people, our local community, but incorporating a lot of math into it. So next slide. Thank you. And then this is just what I always do. Everyone probably does this, like the weekly sit spots. So kids can really get to know, this is our local woods. It's behind our school. We have an outdoor classroom. Someone donated 3 beautiful benches that can fit 20 kids around a hemlock tree. So we're out there every week, and they do a lot of work, leaf identification, tree identification based on leaves and bark, their sit spots, their journaling, just spontaneous discoveries, which I have a slide of it in a minute. I'll show you some we've been doing recently, but I think sit spots are one of the freest and easiest way to get kids outside in a meaningful way. And they do get I have them do art with their trees. They did fall pastels of their trees. They're going to do winter ones next. It's a great way to have them feel connected to something other than themselves. Next slide, thank you. Oh yeah, so this was our amazing discovery. Students discover this not every year, but I remember it was a few years ago, the first time my students discovered it, and I was like as excited as them because I hadn't really noticed it. I think it's newer now with the climate change, honestly. I think we see more of it. They were blown away by needle ice. And often, and I don't have a slide of this, but after we learned a little bit about needle ice and capillary action, which is a really hard concept, and I still am sure they don't get it, neither do I. But the next day we did the walking water experiment. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that, where you can model capillary action with colored water and paper towels. So I also tried to find something outside, bring it back in to enrich the lesson. And so that was a science lesson, and they did sketches and took notes. But they were just like, this was incredibly exciting for them. And to me, they're mining for needle ice. They collected a whole bunch for all their friends. They brought it into the classroom. They noticed it melted the next day and they were sad. Next slide. And of course, David Sobel has another book about map making. I'm teaching the students to use compasses. Again, it's that sense of place, right? Really knowing it's hard if kids don't know what direction anything is in. So we started talking about it in the classroom, and everyone thought because our map was hanging in the front of the room that the front of the room was north. They just make that assumption. I don't blame them. It's easy to think that. So this has been really fun. I do compass work every year and map making based on David Sobel's work. This is the map of our woods actually in our outdoor classroom. Again, free, easy, very meaningful. They're going to be doing mapping of Springfield as we move into the Abnaki work in the industries. So they're going to be doing a lot of maps. So not just the woods. And yeah, so I think my time is just about up. But so basically, I would say, I think of a big lesson. What can I use outside to address it? Who can I get to help? And people have never said no, ever. How can I use these resources to inspire my students? But I think more importantly is how can we honor and support their own innate interests and enthusiasm? So that's what I try to do. And sometimes I write grants. I wanted to throw that in. And in the slides that you'll get sent to you, I have a few foundations and links to that. So there are grants out there too to support this work.
Wow, Vanessa, that was so incredible. Oh my gosh, hooray. All of our panelists are giving you big props right now.
Thank you.
That was incredible. I was cracking up, and I can tell you that so was Rebecca, Allie, and Maureen when we learned about Jupiter and that you knocked on someone's door to see if you could hang up Jupiter at their house. And bless that bus driver who listened to you all holler 10th of a mile every 10th of a mile. They are true saints, I'm certain. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, folks, in the webinar, we will open up for questions at the end. So we do have 2 more presenters who are going to share what they do for place-based teaching and education And then we'll open it up to questions at the end. And you will be getting a recording of this presentation, our slide deck, as well as some additional materials from our presenters. So I'll probably send that email out tomorrow, just so you know, but all the links that we've put in the chat, this whole recording, the slide deck, and some more resources are coming neatly tied up in a lovely email package to you tomorrow. So in case you're really wanting to review this information and connect with our panelists, you'll be able to do that. Okay, so our next presenter is Maureen Rowe. And Maureen, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours. And I'm going to put myself on mute, so take it away.
Okay, am I not muted anymore? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So getting a little further. So place-based learning on a budget. So like I said, I'm Maureen Rowe. I mentioned this earlier, but I did 5 years environmental education program coordinator at a local New England nature's classroom. So that is what my first kind of step into place-based education was. Then I did a year of farm to school coordination, which had a lot to do with grant writing, just like my fellow panelists mentioned. And I'm currently in my 3rd year teaching at Stockbridge Central School, a focus on math and science. So that's me and a student for my first year. They're like, do you want to go snorkeling? First year teacher? Of course I do. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but just being outside. So big ideas of place-based education. The 3 things when I was trying to put the slideshow together that I really value in place-based education is the flexibility, the creativity, and the network. I think we've all talked about that a little bit. So flexibility is it's about engaging students in learning through relevant local and hands-on experiences. And so depending on what day of the week, whether you're going outside your classroom door or the weather is changing, if it's a snowstorm, you want to go outside, like being flexible with your teaching. Creativity, let children explore, problem solve. This has really resonated with me this year, especially as someone that's really focused on teaching math and making those connections in environmental ed and place-based education. And create, children have a sense of wonder that we lose as adults sometimes, so let them figure things out. And my best example is one summer I worked at an inventors camp at the Montshire, and the kids had invent something, and one kid was like dead set on like popping a balloon. I was like, okay, like that's never gonna work. But so that energy, and same thing now, I kind of hold my tongue sometimes when the students are building. So this is a picture. We're doing a survivor unit right now outside. We do it outside science on Fridays. I'm gonna get to that later in the slide, but these students are showing their peers. There's lashing involved. I was like, shouldn't you dig a hole to make it more supportive? But I'm letting them problem solve it out, figure out what works, what doesn't work, how to adapt and change. And that's kind of my connection to math. And then last, just like if I said throughout, is network within your own community. This is essential to create a place-based education rich environment for your students. So later on this slideshow, I'm going to talk about the network here in Vermont that you probably can find also in other parts of the country. But so this is the woods just outside our school. Our school is kind of up here. And we go every Friday for a little over an hour, and the kids are so excited, and they're building survivor shelters. Another big thing that I do, like I mentioned, math, and so my heart is in environmental education and being outside. So I've taken that and turned that into math. So this year I teach 1st grade math, I teach 4th grade math, 5, 6 math. And you can see this is just like a snippet we have. So I wrote mud math, the 1st graders in the right-hand corner. Instead of the manipulatives in the classroom, we went outside. We made mud piles for groups of 10, and we did a similar thing with snow math as well. I just don't have a photo of that. And charcoal math. We had a fire, campfires at school for s'mores, and there was leftover charcoal. So all my math classes, we went outside and used it on the rocks. Then to the right, we got some measuring tapes donated to us. You can see that I've used them pretty regularly. We'll get to this a little bit later, but we're building outdoor furniture, and she's measuring the distance between the legs. This is also her design using math and designing her outdoor furniture. She went with it. I said, okay, design your chair, and this is what she came up with. So it was pretty incredible. And then you'll see in a moment what that came out to be. In the bottom corner, you see the students measuring garlic. We planted garlic in the fall, and I had them measure out the distance with their tape measure for that. And then the student, she is measuring sticks. We're doing stick fractions. And then it's been a very much, let's measure how long the school is. Let's find the perimeter and the area of the school bus. And so this is a student in the top trying to measure the height of the school bus. And then we have shapes in nature that I incorporate throughout. We build structures, but the strongest shape in nature is a triangle, and demonstrating that with stand on 1 foot or standing on your 2 feet. What shape do you make with your 2 feet? So I do, and then this is a great resource, Wild Math Curriculum, that is it's not free, but it's $20 per a grade level for the PDF. And I've used pretty frequently this year. My next slide, oops. And then the next thing is taking advantage of your school environment. I mentioned before as well. So what you see here is very similar to what my co-panelist has mentioned. So this girl, she is so excited. I want to show a video, but we were starting to throw quart rocks, and they started making sparks and exploding, and us being like, all clear, and the kids. So we spent like a good 45 minutes throwing giant quart rocks and seeing that reaction and talking about what's happening. And that was, and we did that for 2 weeks straight. The kids loved it. And then this student, in that same breath, they're doing tree ID. They have their books, and I try to tag that into, okay, before we go fort building, can everyone find a coniferous tree, find a deciduous tree, find an oak leaf, find this. And so I incorporate that as well. And then the right-hand side, you see us in the stream. Usually we've gone to this is the White River. So just like you mentioned, the Black River, finding macroinvertebrates. This is alongside with our snorkeling. So the White River Partnership, you'll hear me mention quite a few times, but in this picture, this is a volunteer from the White River Partnership. They're a nonprofit with water quality. And so I've done a lot with them. So we couldn't go on a field trip, so he came to us. We're just very fortunate enough that our river is literally in our backyard and walking distance. But usually we go, and it's all free of cost. So snorkeling, it's a nonprofit. They have all the funds to get all the equipment for it, changing rooms, etc. So I've done that for 2 years in the early fall. And I'm sure if you're in from Alabama and other parts of the country, you can contact your local Fish and Wildlife. But they've done a lot of incredible stuff. So this was on an outside Friday, and that wasn't necessarily in my science curriculum right away, but I want to take advantage of what we have. But when I've done, I'll get that in a little bit about science experiments and being outside. But like I mentioned earlier, so creativity, problem solving, I can get through that enough, is it's great to see the kids problem solve in real life and bringing that into the classroom and into outside and into just, it's important that you don't know things right away and what might not work and what might work next time. And they're lashing. It might not be the perfect lashings, but they're learning how to do it. And then focus and planning. They have to plan out their survivor shelters. So I talked about environmental science. So I'm not going to go through it too much, but this is just a quick slideshow. I've shown this is what we showed when I introduced. So they were doing survivor shelters. I did not make these. Have no credit in these. These are from Bethel Middle School. I walked myself and I took pictures to show the students. But this is, so I just have a friendly slideshow to show my students, and they can do nature art I've done with students outside. Again, these are not my photos. This is from Andy Goldsworthy, but these are survivor shelters. So this is kind of what I told them. This is the plan for Fridays, and they can choose fort building, plan ID, and art. Oh, that's my timer. I have 2 minutes left. As we go through that and just reminders of what to do. So that was just a little quick slideshow that I've made. Now I'm back to full screen here. Hold on. So hands-on learning at school. These are examples of hands-on learning I've done in the last couple of years, and they joke, you're like so excited. So I do Trout in the Classroom, and that's a national organization. Depending on what school you're from, like we're very fortunate enough, it might cost $100 for you to have the supplies, but you can also reach out for grants or the nonprofit. So we work with Trout Unlimited. And so during COVID, I brought they were still eggs, and we brought them back to my apartment. No, they weren't eggs. They were a little past the egg stage. So this is me in my apartment, and I ended up doing blogs all spring about the growth. And Rebecca's smiling because she is a parent in the school and probably watched some of those videos of that. But that is something I've done every year, and the kids, we're getting ready for it now, and it's an incredible program. There's so much math, literacy. So I focus on math and science. I'm not as much in the writing and literacy, but there's so much you can do with that. And then in the bottom corner, you see rocks and a pencil sharpener, etc. That was my water quality experiment that they had to create a town. And we did pesticides and sprayed with, it was actually colored sugar that they had to sprinkle for different chemicals, and then they sprayed rain and watched it all go fall down. In that same breath, I've done things like water quality relay and about turbidity and E. coli and things that are relevant to our community. I've done pollution tag. This past fall, I've done a lot of antigen tag. And what does that mean? Then you can see that these are the final products. Earlier I mentioned about designing our outdoor furniture. So they were lashing these things. And again, the network, a parent did all this for us. They had some driftwood. They cut some, part of the kids' homework was to collect wood for our chairs. And we did that in an hour and a half. We need to screw them in because they're kind of falling apart. So again, user resources. And this is a student, we're doing COVID science. So not quite outdoor education, but in that same vein of place-based education and doing something hands-on. And then my last slide, because I think I'm running out of time, is just a slide of resources. So here in Vermont, I didn't mention this at all, but this is them gardening. Oh yeah, I did mention the garlic. So they were so excited. We have a lot of school gardens at our school. So that's something I think a lot of us share. But here in Vermont, so White River Partnership, Trout in the Classroom, Vermont State Parks, VEEP, the Vermont Energy Education Program, Vermont Harvest of the Month, Vermont Fish and Wildlife, Green Mountain National Forest. I've had some connections in all of these, whether they're a parent or people I've met at workshops, that for the most part, these are all free opportunities with some caveat of funds. And then I put field trips that might cost or might be free. Like we go downhill skiing when it's not COVID. That's something that is funded by a wellness grant. Sugaring, we live in Vermont, so like kids will go to the sugaring house. And I mentioned earlier, snorkeling and water quality. I planted trees with the White River Partnership in the floodplains here locally. The whole school have gone to a local farm to go sledding and see the goats. I've worked with Rebecca and nature programs for schools, state parks. We've done Green Up Day. We've pulled invasives. We've also done, this is not as much on a budget, but week-long environmental ed programs, 1 or 2 days of the Holbert Center. So I used to work in Nature's Classroom, so that's kind of where my push to falls in. VINS is Vermont Institute of Natural Sciences, and then Montshire Museum. So those are kind of just a variety of resources. And I'm done, and then I'll stop sharing.
All right, Maureen, thank you so much. That was awesome. And you spoke to this, but what I feel like is really unique about your presentation is that often in place-based education, people, or in my experience anyway, I see more activities based on the humanities and writing opportunities and art-based opportunities. And so to really see some scaled up and scaled down opportunities for math outside was so cool. I'm like over here, like just taking all the notes that I can.
I'm getting my master's in mathematics right now, so that's part of it.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, you're a true gem, a national treasure, and mathlete in my book. So thank you for all that. And folks, again, you're going to be getting these slides. So all of those resources that Maureen just shared, you will have access to. Can you believe it? All right. So I'm going to share my screen again and get back into our presentation. And um, let's go here. We're going to share this. Maureen will screen share. Maureen did screen share. And now Rebecca Roy is our last presenter, and then we'll move into your questions. So I'm going to put myself on mute, and Rebecca, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Lindsay. Wow, it's really hard to go after these phenomenal educators, but I'm gonna try to do my best here. So here's a picture of my park interpreter team. So I have 17 seasonal interpreters doing hands-on, educational, engaging, fun programs for visitors of all ages. And this crew, they work in state parks across the state, right from the north all the way down to the southern part of the state. And they reach over 50,000 people with visitor programs every year. And our budget comes from the fees that people pay to visit state parks. And so we don't have a crazy high budget that you might expect a state organization to have. Luckily, I have a budget that pays the salaries of these fantastic people that come and work with me every year so they can go out and do these programs. But other than that, we're kind of using what we have available. So they do lots of really cool programs. And the main goal, of course, is to encourage people to move towards stewardship and create connections between them and the resources in the parks. Because research has shown that if somebody cares about something, like if they get connected to the lake ecosystem after they're doing a water quality program with an interpreter, they carry that with them and they care about all lakes. So that's ultimately the goal of my work, is to get people to care, feel connected, but also move towards stewardship and go home and make more responsible choices in their lives. And these fine folks, they also lead school field trips, which Maureen talked about a little bit. The fee to have a field trip in a state park for a school group is 50 cents per person. And these great interpreters can design an educational program specifically to your curriculum and your needs. So that's just something to keep in mind. We offer a lot without a lot. So next slide, please, Lindsay. Okay, so our nature centers, this is what they look like. Some are just kind of an old shed that's been redone. Sometimes it's just a table. I like to call them grassroots because it's kind of like whatever we have and whatever we find and whatever we can put together. But I like to think that it kind of represents who we are, as a Vermont organization, and what we have available for our park visitors are things that are really about the place where they are, because the interpreter might happen to find really cool pine cones that they'll bring into the nature center and make a display. That's just one example. They're really creative, but this is what our nature centers look like. And here's another view of one, Lindsay, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Sometimes it's just a tent to gather under, to get out of inclement weather. And the next slide, please, Lindsay. Okay, so as you can see here, we have our Nature Center table. And this is Devaney at Silver Lake State Park. And she doesn't have a lot of fancy equipment for the activity that she's doing. As you can see there, she has some cardboard, a piece of paper, a spray bottle with water, and she's doing a program on watersheds. And that's what they're demonstrating there, is a watershed, what the watershed looks like. And she also had some really old markers and some crayons that she was using to do that program. And simple materials, right? Really affordable materials. Meanwhile, that's my daughter Alice in the picture there participating in the workshop. And she still has the watershed that she drew that day and cherishes that memory. So you don't need anything fancy to be able to have meaningful experiences outside. And granted, it's easy for me to say this because these interpreters are in state parks, which are the gems and the most beautiful places, right? But I just want to stress the value and importance of just heading out the door and using whatever you have available. Yeah, here's Devaney and Alice. They're in a beautiful state park, but they're just on the little concrete walkway outside of the bathroom building and having this really impactful experience together. So you don't need anything fancy. Can you go to the next slide, please, Lindsay? So we know that in order for adults to feel connected to place, they really need to have these meaningful experiences as children. And it doesn't need to be anything fancy. Those of you who are watching, if you'll add a comment about that experience that you had when you were a child outdoors, that kind of puts you on a path to be here today to share this time together on this webinar. I'd love to see that. But my example here is I have Will, this is one of my interpreters, and he's just looking in a mud puddle, right? I mean, it's such a simple thing, but has such potential for power and experience, like even just exploring a weedy ditch, looking at neighborhood trees closely. You don't need anything fancy to have that kind of impact and to teach about place. We don't have any fancy equipment. So what's the one thing that you noticed through my slides that's kind of a constant presence in all of my pictures that I had? I'm just going to go ahead and answer my own question. It's the people. It's the people. This is what it's about. I could fix up a nature center, right? We're going to fix up one of our nature centers. We've got a bunch of donations to do some professional level displays in there. But all the feedback that we've ever gotten when we ask for feedback from our visitors, it's not about the stuff, it's about the people, the enthusiasm and the excitement that comes from staff is way, 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 way more important than any of the stuff, any of the supplies, even the place. It's that person that's making that connection with the visitor to the place. And so hiring people is way more important than having the stuff. And I just want to say to all of you who are watching right now, that's you. I'm talking about you, your enthusiasm and your excitement. You are the key to this. So remember that when you're planning your place-based education and you're wanting to take children outside, it's all about you. You already have all the tools. You just need to share that excitement and enthusiasm with children, and you will send them on that path to understanding place, caring about place, and moving towards stewardship. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and keep going, even if it seems hard sometimes.
Wow, 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 wow. What a pep talk, Rebecca. If you all don't want to go work at a Vermont State Park right now and work for Rebecca, then wow. I mean, that's what I want to do, and I have a job. So that was a lovely sentiment, and thank you so much. And we are going to open it for questions. So I've stopped screen sharing so that everyone can see our panelists and see everyone. And let's get some questions for these folks in the chat. And I actually don't think I ever introduced myself. My name is Lindsay Whitaker. I use she, her pronouns. I am the administrative coordinator for the Vermont Education and Environment Network. And I also am the summer camp director at a farm-based education site in Shelburne, Vermont. And that's what I do. Anyway, Hi. Allie's going to help me field some questions here for our panelists. So again, please be populating your questions in the chat for us. And as we wait for questions to come in, I have one for our panelists. And that is, so we primarily live in, you know, a not very populated state, but what advice do any of you have for educators who are looking to do place-based education on a budget in a more urban area, where maybe access to state parks or much of an outdoor garden or forest nearby isn't quite possible? Maureen, take it away.
I would say, I think oftentimes place-based education gets lumped in with environmental and being outside, which isn't always the case. I think when it backs to the roots of place-based education, you're creating an experience the students will remember. So whether it doesn't even have to be plants, but you can plant microgreens in your classroom and do urban farming that way, or you're doing a science experiment, or you're doing something in the classroom that's relevant to the place that you're at. So I'm not as familiar with urban areas, but for example, when I worked for the state parks, I did a whole energy unit on the dams in the area and where does energy come from, and hydropower. So maybe that's something. Think about what kind of like what Vanessa said about the old mill towns, to find the history of your place and bring it to life.
Anyone else want to field that one?
Yeah, I just want to say that there's a lot of space for doing outdoor education, even if you don't have a lot of green space. I also coordinate Project Learning Tree in Vermont, and there are a lot of activities in there that are appropriate. When you look at things really closely, it's remarkable what you can see. Like one of the activities, you throw a hula hoop in a parking lot, and wherever it lands, you do a micro survey with a hand lens and make note of what you find. And it's extraordinary, the plants and you know, organisms that you'll find even in a parking lot. And urban trees are also a rich resource for study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was going to add to that too, saying that because it doesn't have to always be the environment, Maureen. I was going to say the same thing, but even just a sense of history in place. If you live in a city, what used to be there before the pavement was there? I mean, I'm really interested in going way back now, thousands of years, to see that and have kids see how things have changed, including our lifestyles and how our values. And I think it's incredibly important. So even starting there, and you know, I was thinking, so we're working with the Historical Society in Springfield now with a COVID project. And I think somebody mentioned, maybe Maureen mentioned that too. So they wanted to know children's perspectives on how is life different in the time of COVID. So we're looking at Springfield and their favorite place in Springfield and how is it different now? And they're going to be doing that through interviewing other community members. So again, that sense of place, their community members, whether it be other teachers or the principal or their grandparents or a neighbor. So again, just sort of getting to feel that sense of belonging, I think, is part of that sense of place. It doesn't have to just be environment.
That's great. We had a comment here to contact your local county land and water soil conservation service for help with your presentation, speakers, etc. You can also contact your university extension office, which is a really great resource, or local gardener groups. Master gardener groups are good ones, sportsmen's groups, fishing, boating. Someone else mentioned, I think, maybe it was someone else mentioned, U.S. Fish and Wildlife is great as well. And someone else also mentioned Project Wild is a great curriculum resource and Project Learning Tree. So if you are an educator who feels maybe out of your element when it comes to some of these environmental practices in education, or you want to get your kids outside and you're just not quite sure where to start, those are some really wonderful resources that are great curriculum out there as well. So, all right, I am going to share my screen once more and show, let's see, this one. All right. And so I do want to let you all know that Vermont Education and Environment Network, we are a state level affiliate of North American Association of Environmental Education. And we are a membership-based organization. And, you know, where we find value in this is because we can leverage the impact of environmental and classroom and place-based education through our efforts combined. And again, we do have membership benefits at the free level. So just by signing up and letting us know you're interested in the free level of membership means that you're getting information about these free webinars, you're getting resources, newsletters from us, and we're happy to amplify your events as well. So if you're interested in either our free membership or some of those membership levels that actually come with even more benefit for a sliding scale fee, Allie's going to put the link in the chat so you can learn more about those membership levels and what that gets you and what those benefits are. Including for our members, many grants are available. And so this isn't available at the free level membership, but again, we do have sliding scale fees for and a variety of fees for membership. But if you are a Vermont educator, we have many grant, the Lake Champlain Basin program has many grant opportunities on a rolling basis. So you can get up to $1,000. And this is a great, easy way to get some funding, maybe instead of having, you know, place-based education on a $0 budget, you could have $1,000 budget for your place-based education program. So a quick plug for that, and Allie will also put a link in the chat. And again, these links are coming too fast for you. We will put them all in a follow-up email that you will be getting. All right, and our we are always eager to build these webinars around content that you would find valuable and useful. And so we do have a Google form that we'll share with you that you can let us know what topics you want us to see covered in these free webinars. And we only have the next month planned. And so we are eager to hear from you as to what we should offer in March. But in February, we have Gardens as Outdoor Classrooms. And that is February 25th from 4 to 5. It is free, but you are required to register. And we have some really great presenters lined up that we really just squared away this week. And I can't wait to put some promotional materials together and share out on our social media. So you can find us on social media at Education Vermont on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, and on YouTube. And we'll be uploading this presentation to our YouTube channel, so you can watch it there, as well as all of our other previously recorded webinars. And yeah, that's about all we've got for you all today, folks. And look at us coming in on time, if not early, at 4:56. So thank you again for joining us for place-based education and teaching on a budget. And I know we can't hear you, but a round of applause for our fabulous panelists who are just such pros and really you know, do so much awesome work in the great state of Vermont. And we know that you do great work wherever you all are located as well. And we hope that you'll join us again for our webinar next month. Thanks for joining us and have a great night.